Welcome to Archways Threads, a show focusing on the threads of family and recovery support services that help make up the tapestry of life in recovery. Join us as we share stories from peers and participants in the field and practice of peer recovery support and family support and strengthening. And now, your host, Archways CEO, Michelle Lennon.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Lennon, and I am the host of Archways Threads, the podcast that focuses on peer recovery support services and family support. I am here with Cara LaPlante, who has turned into this kind of rock star for recovery in the college community for Plymouth State University. She has recently kind of joined the Archways team. And I think, how we met is pretty much, the puts the peer in peer, You want to talk a little bit about how we met?
I would love to, yeah. Hello, I'm Cara LaPlante. It was the beginning of the fall semester, so late August. I was in the local coffee shop in Plymouth talking to one of my old professors about my senior project that I'm really excited about. I had an idea, but no real meat and potatoes to the idea yet. So I was explaining to her, my old professor, that I had this vision of organizing a series of community wellness workshops, relaying information to as many people as possible and gathering community. And Michelle Lennon was sitting at the table right diagonal to me, and was brave enough to speak up once my professor left and I didn't know if I should say anything, but I overheard your project and I love the idea, so let's collaborate. And then it really just blossomed from there.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah. And one of the things that I didn't know about Cara, obviously, when we first met, because I was very interested in what she was talking about for the recovery community and family that we support, was the idea of teaching things like stress reduction and mindfulness and using some really concrete examples of ways we can help individuals kind of build that resilience, building in that kind of coping mechanisms that they can do anytime, anywhere. And then also working some of those skills right into their everyday lives, from everything from nutrition to breathing techniques.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was really the goal. Was, wellness is getting a lot of spotlight right now, and I think that's fantastic. But I feel like a lot of the times when we talk about it, it's very general, broad scope, and it can be intimidating to try to implement things into your already busy, chaotic, full lives. So how do we make this information digestible, relevant to people, and encourage them to address wellness in all aspects of their lives? And the community part of the community wellness workshops is two-parted, inviting as many people from the community as possible, but also recruiting experts from the community to engage and to share their knowledge with people, which was great. So it wasn't just me teaching all these classes, but it was me gathering really knowledgeable people and creating a pretty sweet learning environment.
Yeah, I attended the workshops and just found some things really fascinating that was like really easy to like incorporate into everyday life. And one of them was foods that improve mood.
Yeah.
Who knew? I think, improve my mood. You made some chocolate cake and, a coffee, but not the best thing for long-term wellness. And there was like a whole list of foods that one of the individuals brought in about, how that could impact mood and improve, just everyday life.
Totally. Yeah. The stress busting foods were fun. So we had some out for all the participants to try. Really accessible foods: milk, oranges, spinach, dark chocolate, which is always a hit. Yeah.
Pistachios.
Yeah, those were a good one.
Yeah. I think about how sometimes these fruits seem expensive at the grocery store. But like, I think about how oranges or citrus, very often the food pantries have them, by the box. I know one of the food pantries that we work with, that we access a lot for our participants, always has oranges. They always have apples, certain foods that, people may not always access them first because, it's not always convenient to peel an orange at work, as much as it is to rip open a granola bar, say. But when you have that extra knowledge, it gives that extra value, I think, to kind of, incentivize people to maybe, think about their food choices a little bit more if they deal with stress on a regular basis.
Totally, yeah. And that your food choices are so much more than just the calories that you're putting in, that they do have an impact on your mood and your feeling. And like you said, your long-term wellness. And you mentioned the food pantries, and that's really something I wanted to focus on, is giving information that was applicable to people across the socioeconomic scale, that no matter what your situation is, there are small things that you can implement to elevate yourself.
I was excited too to find out the Plymouth market will take food stamps, for families, and they have like incentives that they provide to buy those fresh foods, which was kind of cool to hear. We recently checked in with them. But it was thinking like any community has food pantries for the most part, or communities can access some food pantry that is responsible like for that area to provide that service. So, just something to think about, as we are working with participants. The mindfulness piece, breathing exercises. I love that, we find out that you can trick your parasympathetic nervous system. Like there is science behind this stuff. It's not just, I went to UMass, like forgive me, but we used to talk about the crunching granola folks that used to do meditation and stuff, and it was kind of like, oh yeah, right. 20 years ago. Now we have the science to back up a lot of these, being mindful of your present moment and, the breathing. We talked about body scans, muscle clenching to kind of reduce stress in the moment. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It is so interesting because a lot of the times when we talk about mindfulness, it's almost coming from a perspective that your brain and your body are two separate entities, when in reality we are the same.
The brain is an organ.
Exactly. It all works as one. So that stress reduction doesn't have to be this massive task where you're meditating for an hour and sitting in a perfectly still spot and in a quiet room. It really just takes 2 minutes to just check in with yourself. And that's really all you need. It's really powerful and underrated how applicable and effective it is for people.
Yeah, I was thinking about yesterday, we were in a group together and talking about trauma-informed practice, so trauma-informed care, and like how we can change our state of being by doing some things like that. Just a quick breathing exercise when we're torqued up or we're frustrated or, pulling my hair out because nothing's working when I'm trying to set up the podcast room, right? And just kind of remind myself, I'm in the step of eternity. What does this matter? And just going to plug through the problems until I get to the other side and deep belly breath. It's all good. It's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think also understanding the impacts of stress and what stress does to the body also makes those mindfulness techniques even more relevant, because the processes that you're mitigating, you have an understanding of what's happening in your body. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that adds a lot of context to like, why are we doing box breathing?
Right. Now, box breathing, you want to just give an example of what that is?
Yeah, totally. So for my understanding, box breathing is taking a deep breath in for 4 seconds, holding it for 4, releasing it for 4. Feeling the emptiness for 4, and then refilling your lungs again for 4.
Yeah. And that's, again, it's a tool that I know I've used with participants who may be sitting in a courtroom, are very frustrated, they're anxious, they are terrified sometimes of going to prison. Mm-hmm. And, I can remember just doing that over the phone with her. And she's like, okay, I've got this, and we can literally trick our physiology by doing some of these things to just settle down in our moment, to get through the next moment, and I think we talk a lot in recovery about one day at a time, but I also think everybody goes through stress in this life, so not just people in recovery. And, I think of some of the parents that we work with that, a lot of times they're with us because they are going through one of the most stressful times of their lives, job loss, housing loss, losing their temper in a moment because of stress that affected their children. So maybe DCYF will be involved trying to, maybe support the family to get the resources they need. But a lot of times it feels like, they're the enemy, so there's that stress, and so to have those kind of things in our toolbox to share with the participants can be really helpful. And I know, for a while, all we did was talk about self-care. And, my staff was like, oh my gosh, rolling their eyes, if I hear about self-care and supervision one more time, and, but there's importance to that. But I think, one of the things that we've talked about too is how some of these concepts, they seem so nebulous, or it cognitively, but it's like, what do you do in reality when life is so fast and so busy? And I mean, let's face it, everybody who works in any type of mental health work or family support work or medical at this point, everybody's overworked. Nobody's got time for anything, it feels like. And it's like, we're frustrated because we want to help the person in front of us, but we're responsible for this data and we have to rush you out of the office because we got the next person coming in. Like we see it like throughout the field, really. So I know, like for us, we're taking steps to like build in wellness in the workplace, and I just think about these little things that we can do for ourselves, but we have to take that initiative to do it. Like I know I just got a walking pad for my office because I was thinking, how many times am I sitting in a Zoom meeting or re-listening to a meeting I missed or something that I can be just walking while I'm doing that work. And while I bought it for myself, like we're already in conversations about having different things available to staff that the agency will pay for, and we have somebody that's got a little balance. It's not a balance board, but one of those round things, and a stand-up desk for, a couple people now. A few people have tried that, just kind of see, what can we incorporate that's going to work for the individual? Because I think that's another important thing that, like, I'm not somebody who's ever going to sit and meditate for an hour. Just letting you know.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think like self-care tends to be an overused term. It's very general, but when we talk about, addressing individuals' wellness and then wellness in general, wellness in the workplace, it's really important to understand that it's going to look different for everybody. Yeah. So it does take that initiative to recognize that it's important, but be willing to explore that. Just because you try one thing doesn't mean it has to be the only thing you're doing, that there's so many options, and to really find what rejuvenates you and what makes you feel good is really important.
Yeah, we talk about that, in the recovery world, that there are multiple paths to recovery.
Yeah.
They get very frustrated when people are blamed for not recovering because they've tried something and it didn't work, or unfortunately, I think even some of people I really respect in like the 12-step community have really like put a lot of blame and shame, like, oh, if you don't work it, it's your fault. When for some people, not for nothing, if you struggle with severe anxiety, walking into a church basement with a bazillion people in there that you don't know and being expected to speak can be wicked anxiety producing, We've had participants that have had reoccurrence of use because somebody from an AA meeting, was willing to sell to them. But, so, and then I have, two of our management team that's their pathway, and I feel like no matter what the system is, people are people. You run into good, then, do things exactly right. And then you run into other situations where it's not right for you. And we need to know that there are multiple pathways, and just as there are multiple pathways for recovery, there's multiple pathways for, taking care of yourself,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the awareness and education around just your options in general is really what's going to allow you to explore those options.
But you got to make this step to explore them too.
Right. Yeah.
And I will say, you know, and this is one of the reasons why we're doing a lot of work around this, like in our agency right now, is that you cannot lead where you won't go. You know, so if you're experiencing, you know, a lot of unhealthy habits, or you know, I don't even like the word habits because I have a coach that I have, you know, that, you know, I think about, and I have a coaching team behind her. And, you know, I was thinking about that, you know, they talk about getting 1% better every day, you know, from, you know, the book Atomic Habits, great book if you haven't read it. And how if something doesn't work for you, well, let's move on to the next thing. And, you know, we talk about, you know, having an interest-based nervous system. When it's shiny and new, I'm all in, you know. Then, you know, a year down the road, it's like, okay, you know, and I that has happened to me time after time with health plans. You know, I did karate for a while, had a personal trainer for a while, and went to the gym for a while. And then it was like, I did yoga for a while. And it's like, okay, so, and it was interesting because one of the coaches that I was working with, he would say, like, there's no judgment. If you know that, just try to get ahead of the drop off. You know, what's going to be shining in you this month? You know, what is going to give you that drive, you know, to keep going. And talked a lot about identity, you know, and I think about that, you know, like identity, because, you know, I think when we do peer support, recovery support services, family support services, we tend to think in terms of consequence-based goals. You know, that I need to get a job. So what do I need to do to get the job? I need to get my birth certificate. I need to get my license. I got to get the $10 for the replacement ID. I need to get a ride to the DMV, you know, or whatever it is, you know, we think in the consequence is, I've got a job. You know, I went to the interview, but, you know, assuming that you've done everything you need to do. And then you've got the job. So there's a consequence. Okay, now what? You know, and I was thinking that if that's all we do, eventually we're going to tick the boxes and be done, and people will be on their way. And, you know, thinking about the people that have had the most success incorporating things like self-care into their lives and goals and growing beyond like the checklist, so to speak. It's all been about identity, you know. And I think for me, this stage in my life, you know, health and wellness is a thing. You know, I'm getting, you know, into my 50s, my body's starting to fall apart. It's like, okay, what am I going to do here? And which is why I joined this program. It's called the Fitness Project, and they have a program called Fit to Lead that's specifically for leaders that don't have time, you know, to have a personal trainer on a regular basis or get to the gym every day and on all of that. And working with them, like, I've learned so many different things about how we can coach better in the recovery space, you know. And one of the things that they talked about was tying your goals to your identity. And, you know, so for me, it's not the 10,000 steps. It's not, you know, checking off that I did this workout every day, because honestly, the shiny and newness wears off for me. But it is about, I want to be a fit person, you know? So then it's like making choices in the immediate that tip towards wellness versus unwellness, you know? And I was thinking about that as we've done this workshops, and then it's kind of, okay, where do we go from here, both as an agency, for ourselves, for our staff, and for the people that we work with, because wellness does not have to be this awful big thing, you know. And that's one of the things that I'm really learning from these coaches in this fitness project, is it's like those everyday actions that we talk about, building the building blocks in family support of the protective factors. Wellness can be that way too, just the everyday actions, you know, of kind of choosing in favor of a healthy choice versus a unhealthy choice, which can tie back to the identity of, hey, I want to be a fit and healthy person. And I was thinking for individuals in recovery, for people who want to be a good parent, you know, all of that is really identity driven if we get to the heart of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like, this brings us maybe back to the conversation we had recently about values and how, you know, your values attribute to your identity. Your values correlate with strength-based programming, with strength-based coaching approaches. And so, yeah, knowing what's important to you, you can that's your path. That's your guide. You know, what is important to me? If your family, you know, is important to you, you want to be there for your family. You want to be able to participate with your family. So making choices that are going to assist you on that path.
Yeah. When I think about that, like my daughter, my son, like I have goals for 2025. Like the you know, I go through the domains of wellness and I kind of look at the areas that I really want to focus on. Usually I want to focus on 5 or 10. But one of the things, you know, that I'm learning, you know, doing this other program is just focus on a couple of areas, you know, and it's funny because when you do that, because everything is tied to my identity, everything is tied to my values, all the other areas of my life are benefiting too, you know, and that's pretty awesome, you know, like I'll just share, you know, one of the areas was reconnecting with my husband. He's been in solid recovery now for a couple of years. And I was really unaware of this cognitive dissonance I was living with, of being really resentful and angry still for things that had happened in the past. But it's like I also have this faith value that I'm never going to divorce my husband. You know, I might get mad and say something like that, but I never would. And because I firmly believe addiction, I mean, I know how it all happened with him. You know, it's definitely not his choice, you know, to be addicted to opiates. And, you know, he hasn't touched him in a couple of years. And since his last major surgery. And you know, he's doing really good right now. He's doing a lot of good things and, you know, achieving his own goals, which has been really powerful to see him start to work in his gifted areas again. And, you know, just thinking about how the focus on that meant that, oh, we were going to go out and spend time doing something other than going out to eat. Because that was the thing. Like we were spending a ton of money going out to eat. That was like our date night. And physically, he's also feeling better. So we went out dancing. And we danced together for the first time. And I was thinking about how it also hit my fitness button, so to speak, or that fitness goal without even me recognizing it because I'm dancing all night to 80s music. I'm just going to say it was a lot of fun for me. It brought me back to my, you know, teenage years in my early 20s, basically, and had such a great time. And I was thinking, you know, that's the kind of thing that I think about when we work in wellness into like our plans. You know, it's like, what can you do that? Because really, something like that could have been just the cost of a few Diet Cokes, you know, to go do that. Because we were listening to a friend's band in Maine, actually, we were visiting. Doesn't cost a lot, you know, time, you know, a little bit of travel. We had a great time. You know, had a great time together. And I think about how sometimes we get caught up in, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you know, and when we think about wellness, if we think kind of globally, you know, and then get down to what are the small things or the small changes we can make. Going out and not just eating and you know, in my case, I generally don't drink, you know, so that's really not an issue though. For some people that I know, that can be an issue because it adds a ton of empty calorie, you know, on that end. And of course, folks in recovery, a lot of people stay away from it regardless. But, you know, but there were things like that we could do. Somebody talked to me about pickleball. I'm enthralled. Don't know where I could do that around here, but, you know, just thinking of wellness differently, you know, that it's not just, you got to go buy a gym membership.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that story about you going out and dancing and spending time other than going out to eat aligns so well with people in recovery. You know, I think about when in my really early recovery, how to spend time with my partner without just going out to a bar and having drinks. That was how we spend most of our time. So how do we still get that quality time without drinking? And so it has evolved into doing little stuff like that, you know, going to little shows or just spending more time outside, because that's something that's really important to the both of us, and how it just kind of evolves into quality time as well as elevating our wellness, like you said, without even really considering it. So I think focusing on wellness in the recovery phase is such a natural thing because you're displacing time. And what an incredible opportunity. You're changing the way you spend your time, and you have a million different ways that you could be spending your time and also benefiting your wellness, the environment, the people around you. It's a really incredible opportunity.
Thank you for listening to Archways Threads. If there is a topic you'd like to see us cover, email us at podcast@archwaysnh.org or call us at 603-960-2128. Visit our website at archwaysnh.org to learn more about the Archways family of recovery and family resource centers.